The time when I realised how serious it was when the nurses came up to me and said, we're going to get the social worker in. And I was like, social worker? Why the fuck do I need a social worker? This beautiful man comes and shows up and just sits down beside me and just starts
praying with you.
Yeah, checking in with me. Yeah. I was like, at first, like really resistant to him. Like, what? Like, why do I need you? And then I realised like how serious it was. And I was like, oh, I'm so grateful for your support. Like, thank you for sitting here with me.
Well, this is an exciting episode, part 2. Here we are a few months later. So
3 of us.
Yeah. And so the 2 charming guests for today's episode is my beloved and life partner, Bek Isaia, and the latest addition to our family, young Audrey. Mm-hmm. This was a good idea, wasn't it, love?
What, having the podcast with her here or having a baby?
Both. So in our first episode, we talked quite a bit. Well, you were, about 8 months pregnant?
Or the second podcast.
Was it the second one, was it? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I was like 8 or 8.5 months pregnant, yeah.
We spoke a bit about our relationship, did we? How we came to be together as a couple. And then we must have spoken about your pregnancy and what a challenging time that was.
Yeah. Yes. Challenging indeed.
And now we've got even more to talk about because since then, little Audrey's been born and it hasn't always been a smooth ride, has it?
No, pregnancy was not easy, but nor was birth. And the first couple of weeks, it was very difficult.
Do you want to just recap briefly? We won't go into your whole pregnancy again, but do you want to just briefly recap what because part of what we want to discuss today is how we had a plan. I know, all I can do is laugh now that we had a plan. Man has a plan and God laughs. And so you had plans for pregnancy. They didn't go to plan. No. We had plans for the birth. That didn't really go to plan. No. We had plan for postnatal. That didn't really go to plan. I have to throw the plan out.
Yeah. Yes.
So do you want to talk about your plan for pregnancy and what deviated from that?
So my plan for pregnancy was that I'd be, eating a super nutritious animal-based diet, taking all the supplements, doing all the right things, being able to exercise. But what that turned out to be was that for the first 3 months I survived on bread and chicken schnitzel and fruit and just vomited so much, the morning sickness, which is not morning sickness, it was all day sickness. Then it went to probably by about the end of month 4, that went away. Like, I wasn't able to get out of bed.
I remember.
Yeah. And then at the end of month 4, I was able to sort of start doing some things, not much, but I could leave the house. And, but then it became reflux and indigestion, like terrible. Oh, it was also nausea the entire way through. And it was nausea that I'd never experienced before. So then it went to, the indigestion and reflux, which I'd also never had before. So that was new. And month 6 was all right. I still vomited throughout it, but it was an okay month. And then indigestion and reflux came back month 7. And then in the 8th and 9th month, I started vomiting every day again. So it was really tough. I didn't enjoy pregnancy. Pregnancy was beautiful, but I did not enjoy it.
Well, interestingly, I think that physically you didn't enjoy it at all.
Physically, yeah.
But emotionally, you've never been more...
Great.
Yeah.
I was great emotionally. I felt miserable, but I was great emotionally.
Yeah.
Like, felt, on top of the world.
Yes, and that can be some of the pregnancy hormones, I guess, or maybe you're just happy about being pregnant. And so your plan to eat a really nutritious diet because you wanted to grow the healthiest baby, that kind of fell over, and you wanted to exercise, and I think you did maybe a couple of aerobics, water aerobics.
I did aqua aerobics about month 6 and 7.
Yeah.
And then I would have continued it, but then it went into sort of the colder months, so they actually stopped doing it,
Okay.
you know, so I wasn't even able to keep doing that. But yeah, I mean, the first 3-4 months, you know, I couldn't eat eggs. I couldn't say the word eggs without retching. You know, definitely could not look at beef, red meat in any way. So it was tough. And I'm so grateful now that my diet for the 12 months before preconception was on point. I'm so glad that we had planned to have a baby and that I did that.
I think that was the only part of the plan that went to plan. Was we chose when we were going to have the baby.
Yeah.
And so, I remember you being quite upset because you thought, and you had built up, like you said, in the 12 months before pregnancy, all the stores of all those vital
Thankfully.
minerals and fats and everything, vitamins and things that the baby needs. Yeah. But I remember you feeling quite upset and worried that maybe Audrey wasn't going to get what she needed for her development.
Yeah.
And as it's turned out, she's fine.
Totally. Yeah, she's perfect. Yeah.
So I don't think we need to cover the pregnancy too much more than that. But let's talk about our birth plan and in a lot of this we had really open discussions and we were really in agreement with a lot of it, very very much aligned. We think alike. But I was more or less deferring to what you wanted, but a lot of what you wanted was exactly what I wanted. So what was the plan for the birth?
The plan was that we would have a beautiful home birth, just like the Byron people that we are. And we had a midwife and a home birthing midwife, and it was going to be a water birth. And an hour after the birth, I'd planned to be in bed, all snuggled up, the three of us, eating soup and, it just being amazing. Cord clamping, delayed cord clamping. I planned to have my placenta encapsulated. What else did we plan to do?
Yeah, I think they were the main things, weren't they? Home birth with a home birth midwife in a pool, delayed cord clamping, on the breast straight after birth, placenta encapsulation, staying at home. No, it's like the fourth trimester, so we were going to have no visitors come to the home for 40 days or something.
It was just going to be you and me holding her.
And nobody touching her because we're a bit worried about not having a strong immune system. We didn't want to have her exposed to too many grubby hands or something like that, wasn't it?
Yep.
Okay, and then that was the plan, and God laughed.
Yes. Yes, and thankfully we can laugh about it now too.
Oh, we weren't laughing at the time.
No, we weren't.
No. So, do you want to? Let's start with. You go into labour. On my birthday, on my 63rd birthday.
Yep. 5:30 on the 5th of August.
Yeah. And I mean, it's possible she might have been born on my birthday if it had been a 6-hour labour, but it was more like a 36-hour labour. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So 36 hours. Went into labour 5:30 in the afternoon, and totally expected to have birthed her, that night, because, labour and the contractions came on fast. It was it wasn't like I had this slow easing into contractions, and, I actually felt like it came on pretty fast and pretty strong.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking at the beginning, I was like, oh my God, is this this is right at the beginning, and this feels like a lot, And so was it 11 o'clock that night we called the midwife. Oh, side note.
Midwife.
Our midwife, the midwife that we had for the 5 months before, turned out 4 days before I gave birth, another midwife called me and said, she's no longer your primary midwife. Something's come up. I'm now it. And I 5 minutes notice because she's like, I'm 5 minutes away. I'm going to come and see you. And I'm like, you're a complete stranger walking into my home after I've built rapport with this other midwife, and you're now only telling me that now you're my primary midwife. Who are you? So that was a Thursday when she came. I think it was a Thursday when she came round. And then,
that threw a spanner in the works, didn't it?
That really did. I was absolutely heartbroken.
You I don't want to interject, but you have trust issues with the feminine, and it takes you a while to build up trust with women. And, there's a historical reason for that. But you've managed to do that and build some beautiful female friendships. Yeah. But in particular, like someone who's going to help you birth your baby, that was a really important relationship that you needed to develop.
Incredibly vulnerable position that I'm in.
I saw.
And super intimate. And I had built trust up with this midwife who was amazing. I have, so that was on the Thursday before. And then, I went into labour on the Monday, and the Monday morning, this new midwife came around again for the second visit to learn about what our plan was. And then that afternoon, I went into labour. Yeah. So thankfully, we actually didn't put off that meeting another day. It was then 11 o'clock that night. We called the new midwife, and she came around, and I was already in the pool. And again, totally expecting that I would be, I'd have a baby in my arms in a couple of hours. And I think, there's so much of the 36 hours that I actually don't really remember too much of. Yeah. I feel like possibly when she turned up that the birth started to slow, like the contractions started to slow down. But I was in the pool. I honestly thought I was in transition. So my understanding of transition is like women will tell you, you're in transition because that's when you say, I can't do this anymore. It's too hard. Make this be over. And I was definitely at that point.
You were.
And and I remember you were on, holding my hands, and there were a couple of times when you just, you were sobbing, you would because I was in so much pain, and you knew that there was nothing that you could do for me. And, so I don't know. It then comes to morning. I don't know at what point I got out of the pool, but I got out of the pool because I was just like, if this is slowing it down and get me out.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? We only found out later. I don't think we knew that before that if you get in the pool too early, it can slow the contractions down.
No, I knew that, but I honestly thought
that you were transitioning, right? so it may have been that, or it may have been something else, but you went into what they call like a long latency period where the contractions got further apart and less strong for 24 hours or something.
Yeah. And I think we'd also called my close friend Julia to come around. It was like the middle of the night, or 2 a.m. I think she came around. And I don't know when the second midwife came, but I think it was sometime in the morning. On what day? On the Tuesday, they were still there up until midday or something.
I think about 2 p.m. I think at that point they said they might as well go home.
Yeah.
And they both left.
Yeah.
And, you were still having contractions. They says, we'll come back in like 8 hours or something.
Yeah, we all need to sleep. Everyone needs to go home and sleep.
Are you curious about how working with your shadow can improve your life and your relationships? Every Tuesday night at 6 p.m, I host a confidential live Q&A call where you can ask questions, access resources, and receive personal coaching from me. I have so many people come to me ready to do their shadow work, but they tell me they just can't afford the financial investment of one of my programs. So, to make professional shadow work accessible to as many of you as possible, I've created the Shadow Work Academy. The Academy is an online space where you get instant access to my inspired community of like-minded individuals doing the work and taking full responsibility for their lives. you'll have the opportunity to hear other members' stories and share your own. Within the community, you can post your questions, challenges and breakthroughs, as well as seek professional support and guidance from me personally on the live weekly call. Within the Academy, you'll also find my men's sexual mastery course called The Sexual Samurai and my introductory level shadow work course, Shadowboxing Level 1. Access to the Academy is 100% free until December 24. If you join before then, your access will be free for life.
I'd also had my dear friend, Dr. Vanessa Strauss come, and she came from, I believe, 10 a.m. for a couple of hours. Now, at that point, when she came, I was in the shower, I was on all fours. I barely even remember her, like, coming down, like, onto all fours herself and started speaking to me. Because I felt like I was on another planet. Like, I certainly wasn't on this planet. And then she started treating me on the couch, and I, like, to try and help progress the labour again.
Yeah.
And whatever she did definitely helped. I remember, like, really feeling the contractions getting stronger. But then she went home around midday, and I think that's really when everyone sort of just decided to start going home themselves. And again, then I don't think I have any memory of it going from, like, the daytime into nighttime again.
Just a blur.
It was just a blur. So I don't really know when the midwives came back again.
I think it was about 11 o'clock. 11 p.m. Yeah. So they were gone from about 2 p.m. till about 11 p.m. And I thought it was interesting that, you know, you were already, about 15, 16 hours into your labour, and they said they're going to go home for 8 hours. I'm like, okay, I'm going to birth this baby, am I?
I didn't eat at all during that time.
Yeah, you didn't.
They must have come over earlier, because I do remember it must have been 11 o'clock that night when...
Oh, they got me out of bed. So it's okay.
Yeah, so one of the midwives woke you and said, oh, Bek's fully dilated. My primary midwife had gone laid down in our spare room, and the second midwife who was there, she was like, oh, you're fully dilated. Like, and it was a surprise to her. The primary midwife thought I was only like 6 centimetres dilated. She's like, you've still got hours to go. Like, I may as well go home. And I was like, do not go home. Do not leave me. Like, I think I intuitively knew that I was like, yeah, like I felt like I was about to have a baby. Like, it really felt like that. And so, yeah, the second midwife says, oh, you're fully dilated. And she goes to wake you up, and she gets the primary midwife back up again. And then I proceeded to push for 6 hours straight. And that was the most intense thing I've ever done in my life. And I don't know how half of Byron didn't hear me screaming.
That was some of the most serious gangster shit I've seen in my life. Like, you were, like, in a primal, on all fours, naked, of course, in the bathroom, screaming for 6 hours.
I refused to hop back in the birth pool because I was too scared. I
think that's the point. That's the point at which I was sobbing, because, you know, the person I love the most is in this, like, dark night of the soul, screaming in pain, and I'm the most useless person in the room. I can't do anything. Yeah. And I just, you know, never felt more useless. And, you know, the midwives couldn't do much either, because there's not much you can do for the pain except bear it. And, yeah, pushing for 6 hours is not that common.
No. Well, I've since found that out, yeah. The midwives, I know, you know, I was going from, like, the lounge, like the couch and lounge room to the bathroom, like, maybe every 5 minutes. And then I would, you know, I don't know how long I would be pushing for, but that was, like, the contractions were so intense that, you know, it really felt like there was something coming. And every time I tried to get up off the couch, I felt like there's a head right there. Yeah. Like, I couldn't get up off the couch. It was so hard. And so then I'd be back on all fours in the shower, and the midwives would come up and they were trying to feed me. They were like, you haven't eaten in 30 hours, you know, so they're trying to feed me pawpaw, and I was like, pah, pah, spitting it out. I was like, that's disgusting. Yet pawpaw was the thing that got me through the first 3 months. They were trying to give me honey. Like, just food tasted disgusting to me. I didn't want it. I think I was only on, like, drinking water and sugarcane juice. And, you know, like it was just so intense. I still had energy to get me through and to...
It was a complete marathon. And like the whole idea behind pushing it is when you're 10 centimetres dilated, because that's the part when you can, you know, push the baby out. You can't push before then, because if you're only 9 centimetres dilated, you're not open enough. And so the whole idea is, okay, well, you can push now. And you pushed for 6 hours without getting anywhere.
I had the need to.
I get that, because the baby was engaged.
Yeah.
And you know, and
so
we
we
were so
pushing out of, you know, like pushing when I wasn't meant to. It really felt like
you were being told to push.
Yeah, but it also felt
like, natural to push. Yeah, because the baby's head's engaged and wants to come out. But you were really committed to having a home birth. Mm-hmm. And I suspect maybe that's why you end up pushing for 6 hours and not 2 or 3, because at some point it became obvious to me and the midwives, and think possibly to you, that she wasn't coming.
She was not coming.
And we now know the reason she couldn't come out was that she was posterior positioned.
Yeah.
And so the circumference of the opening and the circumference of her head is a big mismatch. And so at that point, you know, some babies can still be born like that. But, you know, 200 years ago, it's possible that both mum and bub can die from a posterior pregnancy that doesn't progress. And so the midwives made the call at that point that we need to get to the hospital, which we didn't want to go, but we had planned that our plan B was to go to...
Well, our plan B was to go to hospital, but I remember... for at least the last 4 months of my pregnancy, you know, we were ticking off all the boxes of all the things we needed to organise at our midwife. Here's a list of all the things we need to do. And I'd done all of them except for pack the hospital bag. And you kept saying, have you packed your hospital bag? I was like, no, I don't. If I pack a hospital bag, then I'm just like putting that into my space that, you know, there's going to be a plan B.
Such a Byron hippie concept, putting it into my space.
I refused to pack this hospital bag. And so then, by the way, I'd also vomited multiple times throughout the 36 hours. And so, yeah, I definitely didn't feel well at all. But, yeah, then the midwife had said to you, hey, it's time to call it. We need to go to hospital. Like, there's something up here. And every time they actually did check her heart, like, to see her heart rate, she was never in distress over that 6 hours that I was pushing. Yeah. She was never in distress. And so I think that was the other reason why they were like, well, cool, let's leave her. Like, you know, the baby's not in distress, so she's fine. But they were like, yeah, there's just something not right here, you know. And so they called it. And I remember the midwife saying, have you got your hospital bag? And I was like, no. So, again, then my friend is running around with a list, packing things, and within 10 minutes, my understanding, within 10 minutes of them saying, right, we're off to hospital.
We were leaving.
We were in the car.
Yeah.
So bags were packed, the midwives were packed up, you were ready to go. I just was on the couch on all fours going through my contractions, and then somehow I got into the car and started freaking out once we'd pulled away because I forgot my vomit bucket. And
it's a 45-minute drive to the hospital.
Yeah.
I wasn't concerned about her being born in the car.
Oh, no, I wasn't either. No.
6 hours of pushing.
Yeah, she wasn't coming.
That was not a concern.
No.
I'm like, she's not going to be born until we get to the hospital.
It's like, you know, every time I was in the shower and I was like feeling this huge contraction come on and my body just naturally went into it, you know, I kept looking at the midwife being like, how much longer? Like, how much longer is this going to be? And, you know, the midwife's like, not too long. You know, you're progressing. It's not, I honestly don't think that I was. I was, because I could feel that I was, but it was like a hard slog. It was so horrendous. And so, yeah, 45 minutes to the hospital, I was like she's not coming, you know. But I was still going through all the contractions in the car, and I couldn't sit because I had a head right there. And then as soon as we pull up to Lismore Hospital, like we also contacted our obstetrician, so he met us there. So it was about 5:30 in the morning at this point.
Yeah.
And he met us there, and as soon as we pulled up at the hospital, like there was a guy there waiting with a wheelchair, and I couldn't even sit in the wheelchair. And yeah, so then they took me up, and the obstetrician checked, and he was like, "Yep, she's posterior." I mean, I also had a little bit of gas, which I remember getting like a little upset about because I didn't want any.
Not flatulence. You're talking about nitrous.
Oh yeah,
you had a bit of gas.
Yeah, I remember like at first being like, "No, I'm not having any. I don't want any drugs," and you were just like,
take the nitrous.
Take it, and it certainly helped with the pain. And also, I guess, my anxiety, because hospitals give me major anxiety. And then the next thing I know, like the obstetrician's like, "Yep, she's posterior, she's not coming out." Well, I say she. I was convinced I was having a boy. And so then I guess I'm signing consent form, which I didn't know exactly what I was signing. But it was, you only told me like a week ago, like, because I was so surprised you were signing a form for a cesarean. And I was like, what? I thought I was signing a form for like a forceps delivery, but it was forceps trial and then cesarean if that didn't work.
Yes,
I
correct.
had no clue what I was signing my life to.
You had baby brain, didn't you, at that point? And a bit of gas on board.
Yeah. And then I'm getting a spinal and I'm getting needles put into my back, and just not at all what I was expecting. And yeah, it was, at the same time, it wasn't what I wanted, but it was also what I guess, like, I mean, I wasn't pressured into anything. Like, I don't feel like all these interventions, like, just rolled in. And
we'd had the conversation prior to this that if it got to this point, you were going to trust me to make the medical decisions on your behalf.
Yep.
And so I'm just like, yep, we're going to the hospital. Yep, you're having a spinal. Yep, we'll sign that consent form. Because at this point, I mean, like you've already got the laughing gas on board, and you trusted me to make those calls on your behalf. So I think at that point you probably just relaxed and went with the program. Yeah. Somewhat. Yeah.
Well, I guess relax is one word. I was also like, I was shaking with anxiety. I remember the doctors and the nurses when I was getting my spinal, like, I was crying and.
Okay. I wasn't in the room for that.
No. But yeah, I didn't feel pressured into it. I didn't feel like once I got to hospital, all the interventions started to roll out, and then I didn't know what. Yeah. Like I had no control over my body. Like, no. But I knew, I was like, she ain't coming, and I need to get this baby out one way or another, and I trusted my obstetrician a great deal. Yeah. And obviously, I also trusted you and the midwives, and if that was the call, then that was the call. So it was I'm getting a spinal. I think they tried 4 times to give me enough anesthetic for it to work. Yeah. And then I'm just wheeled into this surgical room, and sheet up, don't know what's going on, have no feeling. This doctor walks in and comes behind me and is saying, starts talking to me about, a cesarean. Like, what we'll be doing is like cutting across here. And I was like, looked up at him, I was like, what are you talking? What? No, I'm not getting a cesarean. I'm here for forceps. And he was like, oh, sorry, I've just come in. I don't know. I didn't know that. And thankfully, the forceps trial worked. And thankfully as well, because it would have meant if I had a cesarean, they would have then had to have like pulled her back up out. Right. So I'm grateful for that.
Oh yeah, for sure. And cesarean's a lot longer recovery as well.
Yeah, yeah. So then, episiotomy, she comes out and she is covered in meconium.
I can take over at this point if you
Sure.
want. I'll just cover this little bit. Because you had the drape up. Yeah, you had the drape up, you couldn't see. I mean, you probably didn't even know your legs were up in stirrups.
I had no clue.
Because you couldn't feel anything from the belly button down. And so, yeah, I was watching you, but also looking over the drape and seeing what was going on, and see Dr. Steele there, and he had the forceps out, and I'm like, okay, so the baby's coming by forceps. And, you know, it was pretty remarkable watching him use that instrument. I mean, he probably played that instrument like a concert pianist plays the piano. Like, he's got a reputation for being a real wizard with the forceps, and it's not easy to put a big pair of clamps inside a woman, grabbing a baby by the head, blind, twisting that head enough, and then pulling the baby up through the birth canal. I mean, that's also serious gangster shit. And I'm watching this, and he must be 6'2", 6'3", big tall guy. And he was yanking. I'm like, oh my gosh. And then next thing I know, out comes the baby, and she's a little blue and green because she's covered in meconium, which is, you know, what babies release from their backside. And unfortunately at this point was where, because she was a bit flat and a bit blue, they needed to just do a bit of resuscitation. And so he looked at me and said, I've got to cut the cord straight away, because we wanted delayed cord clamping and cutting. I'm like, yes. And he just cut the cord, handed her over. They suctioned a bit of meconium from her nose and mouth, and she pinked up straight away, and she was on your chest within about a minute or two. She hadn't aspirated any of the meconium into her lungs, so she was actually quite fine at that point.
Yeah, yep. And I don't know if it was my days of being having the spinal on board and not really knowing what was going on, but I could have sworn that I heard someone say, "Oh, it's a boy," and then this doctor came up behind me and he was like, "Oh, do you know what you had?" And I was like, "Yeah, I had a boy." He's like, "No, you've got a little girl." And I was like, "Oh," and suddenly it just like all totally made sense. So the whole pregnancy I went thinking I was having a boy. It was only ever going to be a boy. That was what I was meant to be having. I certainly felt the kicks throughout the pregnancy and how strong the kicks were. And then suddenly it just completely made sense that I had a little girl. And I was like, of course I'm having a girl. Like, that makes sense. That's exactly what I want. And so then they, you know, they'd not really cleaned her off, but cleaned her off, I guess, a bit, and came to give her to me, and she's all wrapped up in a blanket, and I was just like, no, skin to skin, it's all meant to be skin to skin. And so they unwrap her as much as they could, and like popped her on my chest, and again, like I'm just in a daze, like I can't feel anything. And then they wheel us off to...
They had to stitch you up first.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, didn't even know that happened, you know. And then they wheeled me off to recovery, and I mean, I think was I asleep? I can't even remember.
In and out. Yeah, you were in there for about a couple of hours because they've got to wait for the anaesthetic to wear off.
So I'm not holding baby at all. Like, you had baby, which is, you know, not at all. Like, yeah, I thought that... Not
ideal, not what you wanted.
No, I totally thought that it would all skin to skin on me, that she'd find the boob, she'd do the crawl, all the things.
Oh, at this point in time, it's pretty clear the plan hasn't gone to plan. Is thrown out the window.
Yeah.
We couldn't use the placenta because that was covered in meconium.
Yeah, which was heartbreaking. I remember, like, you on the phone to the lady who does the encapsulation, and me just crying that, like, oh, that's another thing that's not going right. Like, first of all, she didn't get her delayed cord clamping. Now I don't get her placenta at all, and you were holding her for however many hours that I was in recovery for. And then eventually they took us up to the ward, and I ended up spending 4 days in the ward. My brain and bladder connection had completely gone offline. I was in complete recovery from the episiotomy. I had a huge hematoma that came up. I was on high doses of drugs for me, of painkillers for me, because I don't take them ever.
Around the clock.
And just around the clock. So I was in and out of a daze with painkillers and unable to really hold my baby or really, I mean, I couldn't hold her because I was in so much pain. But I was also not even, again, on this planet. I was just in and out of consciousness, really. And so for the 4 days, like, it was you and Audrey the whole time.
Yeah, that's correct, yeah. At this point she wasn't even breastfeeding because your milk hadn't even come in, so it was just colostrum, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I could barely even do that. I remember my midwife came on one night and, this is back to my original primary midwife. She was coming to see me every night and, you know, she was taking me through how to collect the colostrum, and I'd not long before she came taken my new round of endone and Nurofen, and she watched just my eyes just glaze over. So here she is, like, trying to teach me how to, like, collect the colostrum to feed to her, and I was just out of it. I just looked at her and I was like, I can't even focus on you, like, let alone take in anything that you're saying to me. And she's like, I know, I've just seen your eyes just glaze over.
Yeah.
And so I guess I really, in hindsight, you know, I didn't even have the capacity to even feed my baby, even with the colostrum, you know, because I just was so not there to be able to do that. And it was only my midwife, my home birthing midwife. Here I am in a ward with midwives there, and it was only my home birthing midwife who was, like, coming in to help me collect colostrum at that time. And she was kind of feeding on and off, but I didn't know how long she needed to feed for or how much she was meant to be getting. And I mean, I think even in the birth, when I was still in the surgical room, they gave me, was it Syntocin or something? And so, you know, a synthetic hormone, which I never thought that I would be having. And I wasn't sure if that interfered with anything as well, with my connection to her or with...
Oh, it's synthetic, but it mimics oxytocin, which is a natural hormone, and that's just to help deliver the placenta and help the uterus to contract after the placenta's delivered. So, yeah, it's not that uncommon to give Syntocin, and whether
it wasn't at all what I...
Yeah, another thing you didn't want. So we ended up coming home, didn't we, after about 4 days? Because you were, like, Audrey was fine, but you were a patient for 4 days, and you came home. You had an indwelling catheter in, and your bladder wasn't working, and so we came home, and I've got a 4-day-old baby and a mum in, you know, who's on, like you say, high doses of narcotic painkillers and spaced out with a catheter in. I'm like, I'm back to my nursing days with 2 patients, and we were only home a couple of days though, weren't we?
We got home late Saturday afternoon, home on Sunday and Sunday night, and both nights my original home birth midwife had come to check on us, make sure everything was okay. On the second night, so on the Sunday night, she checked Audrey's weight and realised that she was more underweight than what should be. So babies can lose up to 10% of their body weight in the first 5 days, but she had lost 13%. Which, again, in hindsight, I kind of feel is due to me not being able to give her the colostrum that she needed because I was just so out of it. And I don't even think I was producing enough. I honestly just, maybe I was and I just wasn't able to collect it. I don't know. But so she was underweight, and our midwife said, you know, overnight she has to have 180 mils. So, and at this time it's like 8:30 at night, and my breast milk had only come in on that Sunday. So it was still kind of like just trickling in. And so then we call a friend and we go and a friend comes around to deliver a breast pump, which I'd never seen or used before. I was like, what is this? And, you know, and we also called some very close friends of ours who'd also had a baby about 4 months before, and we said, we need some milk. and
donor milk.
Yeah, some donor milk. And so then you and her partner are meeting up,
on the highway, in the driving rain, to do a milk run.
Yeah, collecting some donor milk and bringing it back. And during the night, Audrey was just like inconsolable. Yeah, but she also wasn't taking the milk, mine or the donor milk. And when we woke in the morning, I guess we barely had sleep. We were in and out of sleep during the night. But we both kind of looked at her and we were like, oh, she doesn't look well. And you called the midwife and said she only took in half of what you said that she needed. And the midwife's like, well, Pete, like, how do you feel? And you said, she's not okay. Yeah. And so suddenly I had the strength to literally run around the house. So before I was, hobbling around, I was in so much pain, and then suddenly I'm just like packing bags again. And actually that was another thing, is that when we actually did come home on the Saturday afternoon, our house was
looked like a bomb shelter, didn't it?
Bomb zone. It was crazy because no one had been there since the home birth. So it was just like stuff everywhere. And in saying that, like the midwives and my beautiful friend Julia had sort of tidied up a little, but there was stuff like just everywhere. And so we really hadn't done much from that. But here I am just like packing bags again and just like jumping in the car. And again, it was pouring rain. Yeah,
at that point, the midwife had called the paediatrician at the hospital, and he said to bring Audrey in and that he would have a look at her. But that we didn't have to go through the emergency room. We could go through the women's unit. Yeah.
Which is where I'd just been discharged from.
That's right. And I was very keen for the paediatrician to look at her because I was worried or concerned about her. Yeah. And so then we drove that day. The visibility was about 2 metres in front. The rain was just bucketing down. I think we were going like 40 or 50 Ks. Yeah. So a trip that would normally
we just thought she was dehydrated.
Yeah.
Which I know is
still an issue.
Serious, yeah. But I mean, that's all it was. Like, there's no way that we would have thought, nor did our home birth midwife think that an ambulance needed to be called, which probably may have gotten us there quicker, but then we also would have had to have waited for the ambulance to come. Yeah, true. And we didn't have time for that.
We need to get there as soon as possible.
And we're about like 5 minutes away from the hospital, and I'm like in the back with her, and I'm like, Pete, like her gums are white. And I just saw your face in the rearview mirror, like just a look of horror. And I was like, but she's still breathing. It's okay. It's okay. I was like, just get there really fast. And, I mean, we couldn't get there any faster than what we were already going. And I dropped you and her off at the front door. And I said, because, you have all the medical terminology. And I was like, you go. And somehow I was able to get in the driver's seat and, like, because I was having problems like sitting, standing, walking, anything. And so, I got in the car, and thankfully it was kind of just like doing a U-turn and going into the parking lot. But then I'm carrying in 4 or 5 bags.
Which shouldn't have had to do.
Which I should not have been doing. I didn't know that at the time. I didn't even think about it. It was just like, just got to get up to her.
Sure.
And like, we hadn't eaten. We had milk in the car, like with us, that was on ice bricks, and so I was carrying everything. And when I get up to the women's health ward, here I am. I see you there, and Audrey's taking a bottle, and I was like, everything must be fine. And there's a midwife there who had been caring for me whilst I was in hospital. She was having a chat with you, just chit chat.
There wasn't much sense of urgency at that point, was there?
No, not at all. And I was like, oh, great, she's drinking a bottle. Oh, what, she's taking 2 bottles? Amazing. And the midwife was like, children, they're going to scare you, welcome to parenthood. And then we go into a room and we're waiting for the paediatrician to come down, and maybe 10 or 15 minutes later he does, and he just takes one look at her. He did a little test. What was it?
So they do a capillary refill. So they just push on her chest, and it blanches and goes white when you push, and then they wait and see how long it takes for the blood to return, and it should be under 2 seconds, and it took like 4 seconds. So in a neonate, that size, that means that she's hypervolemic. In other words, she's more than likely, she's gone into shock, and that shock could be caused by infection or bleeding. So he thought that she was in septic shock from an infection.
Yeah, which not, I mean, you as a nurse with 30 years emergency experience, like, didn't pick up. Nor, like, I mean...
I knew she was dehydrated. I thought she was in hypervolemic shock, but she was just dehydrated. And and even he thought it was still an infection at that point. But then he said, we need to take her upstairs straight away.
The midwife also didn't pick up on
and he's basically called the team for a resuscitation.
Yep. So then she's being resuscitated. It's like 20 people in the room.
Eventually there was up to 20 people, and the resuscitation took about 6 hours. And
they couldn't get any IVs in her.
Well, she was shut down. When you go into shock, all your blood vessels shut down, and all the blood gets shunted to the brain to keep you alive. And so they needed to, 1, do blood tests, and 2, get fluids into her to resuscitate her. And I counted, I don't know, over a dozen different people try different times, feet, elbow creases, hands, both feet, everywhere. And you know, this was going on for even an hour or two. Yeah. And at this point, you know, I've worked in emergency. I've been in these kind of situations. So my nursing instincts kicked in, but I'm still her dad. And I'm like, I'm not sure, you know, I don't know if she's going to make it. And at one point I even wanted to try and get the IV in myself. And I didn't think that would be a good idea, so I pulled back from that.
I remember some of the nurses and doctors, because you were right up at the bed, like, for that entire 6 hours. And they worked around you. Not once did they tell you that you needed to leave the room or move. They worked around you.
I guess they knew that she needed someone by her side. Yeah. And you were on the bed, I think, pumping milk and doing things by this stage. You're still a patient yourself, only. Yeah. And so, and plus I just wanted to keep my eyes on what was going on and to make sure that I could consent to whatever procedures and things they were doing, and I consented to all of it pretty much.
Well, we had to.
Yeah, her life was hanging in the balance, and she needed resuscitating.
We consented to antibiotics. Yeah. We consented to fresh frozen plasma,
blood transfusions, intravenous, intramuscular vitamin K,
everything.
Antibiotics, and at this point, I know that it's all about life saving, and so. An interesting point, about 2 hours in, after multiple failed attempts, they couldn't get and they weren't going to be able to get an IV in. So the next call is a central line, which is not easy on a child. They can be done. I think they even tried an arterial stick in her wrist, and that failed. And so they had to do something what they call intraosseous, where it's like a screw or a nail that's hollow, and they have this gun that kind of shoots it or screws it into a bone in her leg. And so they shot this hollow nail into the bone marrow, and that then becomes the intravenous access, because the bone marrow feeds into the blood supply. And so then they started giving her fluids. They started giving the blood, the plasma and everything, the antibiotics, all through that line. And so had they not got that in, I don't know how things would have gone. In 30 years of working as a nurse, I'd never seen an intraosseous done before. And at least 10 of those years I worked in emergency. So it's quite rare that you actually need to do intraosseous. So for me, I knew the whole time that this could go either way.
Yeah. I mean, obviously when we first went up there, like, I had no clue it was that serious. And then I started hearing, like, well, kind of almost, it wasn't panic that the doctors and nurses had, but I was certainly seeing more and more people coming in, and I knew that they weren't getting the IV in. And so that's where, like, as I say, it wasn't panic, but it was this, like, concern. Like, oh, this one's not working too. Oh, we need to get someone else in to try, you know. And so I'm watching being like, oh, like, this is, like, really, really serious. And then after that, like, every now and then, like, you know, because as they continue to work on her and they're trying to figure out, like, where the bleeding's at and, you know, things like that. And every now and then, like, you just look over at me and just like give me this look of, is it panic, concern? I don't know.
All of the above, bewilderment,
worry,
shock.
And I was like, oh God, like, you know, and I it was like we had this, you know, unspoken,
telepathy.
you know, and so I was going, oh, she might not make this.
Yeah, I was looking at you, letting you know this is serious. It could go either way.
And I just started like, I was just like praying. I've never prayed before in my life, and I just started praying. I was like, she's my 5-day-old baby. Like I cannot bear to live without her. Like she has to survive. And then every now and then you'd also like turn and look at me and like give me the thumbs up. I think like he gave me a thumbs up once I got the osseous in. And you know, every now and then I'd have some of the doctors or the nurses come and check on me and let me know in the medical jargon like what was going on, and it really didn't mean much to me. But we also called a friend in to come and support. Well, they also got actually the time when I realised how serious it was when the nurses came up to me and said, we're going to get the social worker in for you. And I was like, social worker? Why the fuck do I need a social worker? You know, and then like this beautiful man comes and shows up and just sits down beside me and just starts talking to me and
praying with you.
Yeah, checking in with me. Yeah. And I was like, at first, like really resistant to him. Like, I don't need you. Like, what? Like, why do I need you? And then I realized like how serious it was, and I was like, oh, I'm so grateful for your support. Like, thank you for sitting here with me, and just like, like there's nothing that he could really do, but it was like he just had such a calming, loving, supportive presence, and he said, do you have anyone you can call? And so, you know, a couple of my closest friends, like one of them was away. I knew the other one, you know, was working and wasn't able to come. And so, we called another friend, and she was like, yep, I'm there. I'm there, you know. And so, I mean, it took her like maybe an hour and a half or something for her to get there, but she was like, I am on my way. And she turns up with a friend of hers, complete stranger. And but it was so amazing to have.
And our obstetrician showed up as well, didn't he?
And my obstetrician showed up. Yep. And after 6 hours, you know, it was a couple of hours in it, and I also remember hearing them talking about getting the helicopter.
Yeah.
Come and take her to, like, I remember that one of the nurses or doctors said, we're trying to get her to either Brisbane or the Gold Coast as soon as we can.
Yeah.
And then, so I was expecting, you know, I'm texting my friends who have already started a group message with some of my closest friends, just saying, like, I wasn't in the group, but they were just like all letting everyone, like, updating them all. And having them pray and chant and, you know, like focus on, like, you know, as I was updating them, being like, oh, you know, it could be an infection. They're saying it could be sepsis. It could be this. It could be that. And so then they just start praying on certain organs, like, you know.
Well, she'd actually hemorrhaged. She was bleeding into her belly, so not her intestine, but actually her peritoneum, so the actual cavity, the abdominal cavity. And I'm not where from, but that's where the blood was going. And luckily she wasn't bleeding in the brain or the lungs or because she might not have survived. Well, she probably wouldn't have survived that, or if she did, it wouldn't have been good. Mm-hmm. And so probably that was the safest place for her to bleed into.
Yeah. But again, we didn't know that whole time really where, you know, if she had bled on the brain at all. Yeah,
until they eventually did the ultrasound and things. Yeah, and so they tried to get the chopper in the air, but it was because of the storm that day, they couldn't do that. Mm-hmm. So we ended up going by car. It took two and a half hours for the transport team to drive down from Brisbane, and then another 2.5 hours up to 2 hours up to Gold Coast.
Yeah.
It was interesting because I tell people when I'm talk about this that we had the best day of our life and the worst day of our life in the same week.
Yeah.
Because Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised how comfortable I am talking about this now. I thought I'd get emotional, and I do feel emotions for sure, but I think I'm saving that for my therapist. He's back in town from Israel, so Mika, if you're listening, I'll be calling on you. So I do feel like I need to go and debrief and talk about that whole thing, because it was just interesting being an emergency nurse and a dad and feeling like torn.
Yeah, and that still wasn't even the end of it, because once they came and got her, and you went in the ambulance to the Gold Coast with them.
Yeah, to critical care.
And so then she was in ICU at the Gold Coast for 3 days.
Correct.
And, this wonderful social worker at Lismore had organised for us to stay together as a family.
That's right.
And as soon as you got to the hospital before me, the friend who turned up, she ended up driving me there. And as soon as I turn up, and it's, I don't know, 7:30 or something at night, 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, and I turn up, and you just turned to me and you said, they're not allowing us to stay together. And again, I just broke down. I'd broken down so many times that day already, but I was like, what? I've almost lost my baby girl, and we need to be together. Certainly, you and I need to be together.
Yeah. For her.
And
for each other.
They were like, nope, hospital policy, you guys
only
can't.
One parent can stay.
Only one parent can stay. And if you, want to breastfeed her, or if you want to feed her, then it's going to be you, Mum. And half an hour later, they're basically asking you to leave. And, so I'm there, and, there's this kind of chair that turns into a bed that's there, and I cry myself to sleep that night.
After so many requests to create a more affordable alternative to shadowboxing mastery, I've created Shadowboxing Level 1, a 5-week introductory program focused on the foundations of shadow work and how to apply this in any area of your life. Whether you're a therapist, a coach, or just someone with a passion for self-development, this program will equip you with the principles, the tools, and the know-how to achieve life-changing breakthroughs for yourself and or your clients on a daily basis. Using my proven method, Shadowboxing Level 1 teaches you the skills to create satisfying and lasting intimate relationships, reconcile past traumas, improve health and well-being, manage addictive behaviour patterns, and much more. Head to my website at isaiahcoaching.com or check out the show notes to find out more. Yeah, I think you called me because I went and stayed at a friend's. Was it? Yeah. So I went and stayed at a friend's place.
Oh, it was that night. Yeah.
Yeah, in the Gold Coast, and he put me up for the night. And it was that night, I think, that you called and you're in tears. And at that point, I realised, I gave up too easy when they said I couldn't stay. And so I remember when I came in the next morning, and I got in as early as I could, I pulled the coordinator, the shift coordinator of the critical care unit aside, and I said, look, I'm staying tonight. I said, I really feel I let my family down by leaving. I should not have left. And my partner was, very, very upset, and we'd nearly lost our baby that day, like you said. And so I said, I'm not leaving tonight. And in fact, go and get the head of security right now, because I need to have a conversation with him to let him know that he's going to have to throw me out. And I said, look, I'm not a violent man. I'm not going to fight, but he'll have to walk me out because I'm not leaving unless I'm thrown out by security. And I looked him right in the eye because I was going to stay that night, come hell or high water. And, they walked off and had a little team meeting and came back and said, okay, Mr. Isaia, we've had a conference about it and you can stay the night, but it's a one-off. And we're making a special exception. And I ended up staying that night.
The second night, yeah.
And then the third night they threw me out again.
Yes. Each night, because they said she had to feed every 3 hours, 76 meals every 3 hours. And my milk had just come in. I'm incredibly stressed, high stress, sleep deprived. still figuring out even how to feed. I mean, I certainly wasn't actually breastfeeding her, but I was having to pump. And so I was sleeping for 90 minutes and then up for 90 minutes the entire, like every night, just trying to pump 76 mils to feed her every 3 hours, and 90 minutes generally wasn't enough. And so that first night when I called you, I was like, I'm only at 70 mils and they need 76 mils, and like, you know, she's not getting enough. And I was just
hysterical.
Yeah, hysterical. I was like, what am I going to do? And
by this time, you're probably in some form of PTSD.
Yeah, it was a lot. And I mean, after I called you, I then called my home birth midwife. And it was like 11 or 12 o'clock or something that night. And thankfully she answered, and I was like, what do I do? Like, are there any tips to get more milk to come? What have you got? Because this is the first time, like, you know, or the second time I'm using this pump, you know, I don't know what I'm doing. And we spoke for 40 minutes, and I remember her kind of at first, like, she was saying, like, you're highly stressed, you know, you're under a lot of pressure, you know, this is going to happen, it will actually stop the flow, things like that. And then so she sort of like, make sure that you're hydrated and all the things. And then we kind of like went off onto other topics. And I don't even know what we were talking about. But suddenly at the end, like, I looked down, and it was like 40 minutes later, I looked down, I was like, oh my God, I have 100 mils. And she
probably deliberately calmed you down.
Yeah, and it did. It just she was able to calm me down and de-stress. I mean, still took, because at that point I was on like 70 mils, so it still took that 40 minutes to get an extra 30 mils or whatever. But yeah, so that was, you know, the next 3 nights was me asleep for 90 minutes, awake for 90 minutes, like all the night through. I was so incredibly sleep deprived. I've never felt like that before. And also incredibly like emotional. Like, I just cried at the drop of a hat. Like, didn't even really take that.
Oh, the sleep deprivation, that just continued, because after critical care there, we were meant to go back to paediatrics at the Lismore Hospital. And I remember being in the ambulance for that transport. You've gone by private car. And, we forgot the part where our friend drove 2 hours to deliver some donor breast milk. Thank you, Doug. Yeah. And there was another, so we were being, Audrey and I were in the back of a transport vehicle going from critical care at Gold Coast back to Lismore. And there was a nurse in the back, and myself and Audrey and 2 transport drivers in the front. Interestingly, the nurse that they'd sent to accompany us had fallen asleep.
No, that was...
Oh, no, that was after... That was the next day. Correct. No, correct, you're right. It was all a blur. So oh no, yeah, that's right. We're in a patient transport vehicle, which is an old ambulance, with a female nurse in the back, and I'm in the back. And halfway to Lismore, so right in the middle of the highway, they pull over because the nurse thought Audrey was having a seizure. I'm like, oh no, I don't need this, you know. And so I jumped in the back, and the nurse and I were taking care of her and getting her oxygen and making sure.
It sounded like a real clusterfuck in that time.
It wasn't really well organised. They weren't really set up. It wasn't at this point. It wasn't a critical care transport. It was a grade or 2 down from that, so they didn't really have all the equipment they needed. They thought she was, you know, out of danger at this point. And I think the nurse might have panicked a bit and maybe exaggerated what had happened. She said that there'd been a 2-minute tonic-clonic seizure and that the baby had gone blue. I was in the back of the vehicle within 20 seconds and I didn't see any of that. But anyway, she's called a critical care transport. So another ambulance comes up with a critical care paramedic. Right, we're diverting you to Tweed emergency. So then we end up in the emergency room at Tweed Hospital. And it's on again. Like, they think there's another resuscitation going on because you've got this neonate that's 5 days old that's having seizures.
She was
7 days old at this
7 or
point.
8 days.
Yeah. And so they start trying to get an IV in her again, and of course that's still not easy. And I said, can we just pause for a moment? And the emergency doctor says, what do you mean? I'm like, can we just not assume that she's had a seizure? I said, I was in the back of the vehicle. There was no 2-minute tonic-clonic seizure. She didn't go blue. There was about a 20 to 30 second episode where she was eyes open but unresponsive, and her heart rate had dropped a bit and her oxygen had dropped a bit. And so that's certainly not a seizure. And anyway, so luckily they listened to me because of my nursing background, and they thought, well, okay, maybe this was a brief unresponsive obstructive event and not a seizure. So anyway, we stayed there for one night.
So I'd just turned up to Lismore Hospital with our friend who was driving me back to Lismore. I just turned up there when you called, and you were like, I'm so sorry, I have to, like, this is not good news. And I was like, what? You're like, you know, we've been diverted to Tweed, and, you know, my friend Doug just looks at me, he's like, well, we're going there. I'll take you there now. And so, yeah, eventually we get back to Tweed, and, yeah, they keep us overnight in the paediatric ward, and they kept trying to do, like, take more bloods from her, and they kept coagulating, and they couldn't, you know. They just kept wanting to do more and more, and I was like, stop poking my baby. Stop, like, just stop.
Yeah.
Because she was fine. She, you know, you said that she didn't have a seizure. I trust your experience to know.
Yeah. And she hadn't had a seizure, otherwise she would have had more since then, and she hasn't. So I think, it was
and
just
even the doctors, I think, could see that, that she was fine.
Yeah.
You know, but they still kept us there overnight. And so then the next day, they then transported us back to Lismore.
And that's when the nurse fell asleep in the car.
That's when the nurse fell asleep in the car.
Luckily, I stayed awake.
And and again, I had a friend who had to come pick me up and take me to Lismore. And, so then we're at Lismore for another 1 or 2 nights there, because then we had to get to a point where she was feeding enough. And so it was literally at that point that I then start attempting to breastfeed. So she's 9 days old at this point.
And this was the day we both hit the wall.
Yeah.
Yeah, by this time we are both 9 nights with very little sleep, like severely sleep deprived. I think you'd managed to express some milk, and you were going to sleep, and I was going to feed her.
Me sleep. It was the first night that I had to actually sleep. Whereas because you'd stayed with our friend at the Gold Coast,
I'd managed to get some sleep.
Yeah, but this was the first night that I had, and I remember waking up at 3 a.m. and you were not in a good place. Yeah,
I remember you were asleep, and I had to get this bottle of milk into her, and you know she's screaming, and I at this point, like, I'm so sleep deprived and fatigued, and my battery was on 0, and I knew it, and I was feeling really stressed, getting a headache, and then my eye blew out. Like I get this thing called a vitreal detachment, where I start seeing flashes of light and floaters, and pretty much going blind in my left eye. And I knew I was in strife, and so I called the nurse in, and I said, you need to take my baby and feed it. And she says, I can't do that, I just got a new admission. And I just handed her my baby, and I said, take my baby, and I gave her the bottle. I just went to the bed and crawled under the blanket, and I'd hit a wall. It felt to me like I was going 100 miles an hour and hit a brick wall from all that sleep deprivation and stress, and my adrenals had given in at this point of time. And I'd never felt that before, that level of exhaustion.
We were under 2 different kinds of stress. Like you had been... from the day that she went in for the resuscitation and the time, like when we were at Gold Coast ICU, like you were papa, but you were also all over her medical stuff. So
hypervigilant.
And hypervigilant. And I was, you know, having to just pump. You know, I was under pressure to feed her. I refused to let them give her any formula, which thankfully I didn't. But it was like 2 different kinds. Like we both had our things going on, and but you were kind of leading the family for most of that time. you know, and like supporting me. And then that night, like you just broke down, and then in the morning you said, you need to lead our family. And I was like, yeah, I've got this. Like, I've at least had about 6 hours sleep now. I can do this. And so it was like just contacting people like, hey, we need help. We need someone at home to help support us, like to just give us another night's sleep, because that's when like they then were sending us home. And so yeah, we called a amazing friend Lena, and who lives at Noosa, and we told her what had happened, and she was like, I'll be there in 4 hours.
She was amazing. She was an angel. She really helped put us back together and recover. I think we might start to wind it up. It was a long story, and you know, I don't know how much the audience wants to follow the whole thing. But what I want to kind of wind it up with is that it's all been worth it. You and I are both, you know, new parents, and we're besotted with her and in love with her, and you know, I would go through it all again for the same result. But you know, it certainly didn't go to plan in so many different dimensions. It could have broken us, but instead it kind of made us stronger.
It definitely brought us closer.
Yeah. And yeah, becoming a papa and a family's been the most rewarding thing to ever happen to me in my life by far. And every day, the more I interact with her, the more she smiles and we engage and laugh. I'm just like, oh my God, what a blessing, what a you know, awful way to have to go through that. And I wouldn't wish that on anybody. But yeah, becoming a dad at 63, I'm so glad that I didn't miss out on this opportunity. Thank you for being my baby's mama. And you've surprised me. Well, no, you haven't really surprised me. Well, you have. I think you've gone beyond what I expected in terms of your level of dedication and commitment as a mother. I think you're an outstanding mother, and I'm really glad I chose you. And Audrey is too, as you can tell.
I think it's time for another feed. Yeah,
all right. So we might wind it up there. So I hope that story's interesting to some people and they get something out of it. And yeah. It's been great recapping that. A bit therapeutic too, in a way, to share our story. Yeah.
So the moral of the story is, don't make a plan. Plans are not always going to go the way you want them to.
It's also had another effect in that it's made us both a bit more religious, hasn't it? It's like we both are more inclined to, I don't know if believe's the right word, but, you know, to... maybe believe is the right word, to have faith in a higher power and that, you know, she's come from God and that she is an angel and that someone or something was looking over us through that whole experience.
Yep.
All right, we probably should get her a feed. Thanks, love.
Thank you.